In this video, we're going to tackle the next big part in the low poly, and that is the suspension of the bulldozer. This is a fairly important part since you can really see it obviously, so we're going to put some care into this. I'm going to start off with what in my opinion is one of the most interesting parts, the big main drive sprocket. This was pretty fun to model in high poly, and in low poly it should be interesting too. Now you notice that I started off with a cylinder here, and this back part of the sprocket is not very visible. So I've explicitly decided not to use too many sides. If you look closely, you can see that I use 12 sides for it. And 12 sides should be more than enough for this part that generally isn't that visible. Also, nothing is forcing me to model most of this in one part. I did mention that it's easier to bake, but for this part here, I think it's more important to optimize the try count and to not go too crazy with separate parts. So I'm sort of weighing the try count versus the trouble that it will take me baking. Also, since this is a big part, it does make sense to split it up. For small parts, I might not always do it. I mean, it's always a balance, but specifically for this one, my reason would be that with this many sides I'm going to use for it otherwise, it makes sense to do it as a few separate parts, 3 in total really. So this front part, it needs a few more segments than the back parts, mainly because, well, it's just more visible. And I also want to extrude this little area here, because I think it's going to make a difference. It might be small, you might think, like, is this really necessary? But I definitely think it is. Because again, in my opinion, the front part of the sprocket is one of the biggest eye catchers on the entire bulldozer. That's why I really put a lot of care in making a decent normal for this front area here. I also want to do a decent low poly for it. So moving this part around a bit, just making sure it lines up nicely. And with these two easy parts done, we're just going to attach them together. It's time for me to do the teeth of the sprocket. And these are a bit more difficult. I put a lot of, it was quite difficult making these in the high poly already, so I'm just going to reuse these parts. I'm going to follow the same system, select a few bits like this, and once I've selected these bits, I'm going to clean them up and then do the same array tool to reuse it and create the entire sprocket out of it. So making sure to add it to the low poly layer, then going back in there, and now I have to clean this up a little bit. So I'm going to select this and then just do the same thing we've been doing a lot. Select some edges and control backspace to remove them. And I didn't grab the front part just because it's easier to clean up that way. I mean, bridging them is less work than actually cleaning it up again. So there we go. Using the array tool with the correct amount. Moving this in slightly so we get a nice curve. I am using slightly more polygons than I did in the actual high poly version, just because, you know, the silhouette has to be interesting. And these are all separate parts and they're all instances, so that does make it a lot easier to tweak them. And together with snap tools, we can make sure that these instances all fit together. It's really important that we keep these as instances before we start attaching them, or it becomes really difficult to work with this. So there we go. I'm going to close this area up slightly more, target weld that there. And obviously we can't target weld this part to the other object, so we're going to use snapping to get them into the exact same position. So that once we attach them, we can just use the weld with a low threshold and they should simply nicely weld together. So that's done, so I'm going to attach all of them. I use the object renamer to rename all of these to attach me. Makes it easier to select the correct objects because, you know, things like object 00 whatever is not very clear. So I use the tools rename objects tool to rename these to something like attach me in capitals. With that done, just simply fill up the inside and attach it, and that's it for that sprocket. So next up, there's a cylinder here for these wheels, and these wheels are just simple rollers. They're not too detailed. I have to make sure I use enough sides for it. Again, 18 is a pretty good number. I think this should be okay for the amount of sides for these things. And we're going to create this as a symmetry. Why am I creating it as a symmetry? Well, I don't want to do double work, but also more importantly, I want the texture for the front and the back to be shared. There's no reason to unwrap these uniquely. So I'm already considering that and unwrapping it as a symmetrical object so I can I have less trouble when wrapping this. So creating this inner part here. You'll notice that I'm being quite coarse with having my low poly conform with the high poly here. The reason for that is this is not contributing to the silhouette. You actually won't be able to see the low poly silhouette once this is baked. So you can get away with a very simple low poly shape in there. So delete the inside. And we're going to put a symmetry on there. There we go. And that looks about right. Now we've created one of these. Just duplicate it as an instance to the front. And get it to align nicely. Just use the line tool. And there we go. Now next up, we're going to do this front part of the suspension. These are all interesting shapes. I like modeling them. They're always a nice challenge. Some of the details can get tedious, but I like doing the bigger shapes. So I'm going to align this so that their centers sit in the right alignment. There we go. That should be about right. And then convert it to a polygon and just start moving things out and creating a rough shape to start working with. Delete the inside polygon. Then extrude this part and then move it out there. Move this one over there. I'm not doing that final part because, as you can see, there's a slight curve difference in there, which I'm going to add later. I'm adding like the main loops to work with. Deleting this part. Moving this one out. As you can see, because there's that like slightly curved area in the inside. It's a bit trickier to model. Moving these out. Should be about right. Just all trying to get the main shapes in the correct position. And then I'm doing another extrude here. This part it's fairly obvious. You'll see the silhouette there, so I want to make sure that I use enough sides. Might even have to add an extra one there. And then I'm going to do this curved area here. But just using shift move. Then we're going to use snapping. And I switch between different view modes. Like it's easier to snap when things are intersecting when you use the F3 wireframe mode. And then create a polygon in here. And I didn't click correctly, so it went a little bit haywire there. Make sure you actually click on vertices. I'll delete this one here. And again, I prefer using bridge because it's really quick. It's quicker than create polygon. And add an extra loop in there. Like I said, gotta make sure that silhouette's correct, so it does make sense to add an extra one. And that also gives me two nice pairs of edges to do a connection between. Okay, so there's like a recessed area at the front here where the actual big roller fits into. And we're going to cut that in right away, and it immediately gives us the chance to work with a few more edges here. So I'm going to immediately bridge these up. Select these and do a bridge as well. Move that one. I prefer to have them triangulated like this, less stretching. I think that's better. Okay, so we're going to tackle that area over here. Actually going to do a cut in this area so that's slightly more optimized, and then get rid of these polygons. And then just use bridge to bridge those, and I forgot to remove one part, so then bridge doesn't work. Bridge only works on actual open edges, so there we go. So I'm going to remove everything on the inside now. When working the symmetry, you always have to keep in mind that you might be adding polygons that will give you trouble with the symmetry. So there we go. And I'm just manually retriangulating things here, because that's, in my opinion, the most efficient way to do this. Again, using target weld to clean this stuff up a bit. Then I'm going to chamfer this edge here. I modeled it as a straight edge first, but I used chamfer afterwards just to make it slightly rounder. I always prefer to do chamfer afterwards and then just put a symmetry on there. So we modeled this part. As you can see, nothing too difficult. That was quite fun to make. Okay, so next up, The slightly more difficult, smaller part, these are the actual connection brackets for the front rollers. And they sit at an angle, which makes it a little bit trickier to work with. They have these really huge lug nuts on the end because obviously these wheels for the bulldozer, they're really heavy and they want very, very heavy, sturdy nuts to keep them into place. So these are so big that you can see them right there on the right, that I probably won't be able to do them in the normal map. So I'll just model them out. And also the problem here, the difficulty is that this base part has some quite square edges, but the top part has a lot more rounded edges. And again, since this part might be quite close to your view, it's really an obvious part, I'm gonna chamfer these things out. So I'm chamfering them. And keep in mind, I just split the edges in between them so I could do this chamfer operation. Otherwise, it's a little bit difficult to do something like that. I mean, you'll get a lot messier geometry. So sometimes it makes sense to cut your geometry apart, then do your chamfer operation. Because chamfer, in itself, it's a pretty messy tool. And using cut tool together with vertex snap. And remember, always cut from a vertex, from a single vertex, not cutting from a place where there are multiple vertices or vertices that are detached. Or you don't want to cut over an open edge also, that's just not going to work. Okay, so I've welded these parts together. Now I'm just capping those little triangles. And then I'm going to recreate these big lug nuts here. I'm not going to go into the high poly and salvage them. I'm just going to recreate them. Now, after all they are is just a simple cylinder. Moving these into place. Get the size right. There we go. The fact that I gave them a random rotation does make it a little bit more difficult to match, but it's nothing that you shouldn't be able to do with a little bit of care. So there we have it. Our two nuts. Now I'm going to delete the polygons on the inside, but just double clicking until I'm sure I've selected the right one, then just deleting them. So that's it for that part. We can easily reuse this on the other side. And there's actually a few more areas where you can reuse this. Also, I'm deciding to mirror this thing. Why am I deciding to mirror it? Well, because if I'm making an occlusion, one side's going to be darker than the other, so it makes sense to mirror the piece on the other side so the image occlusion will match up. So next part of the suspension is this sort of bottom track alignment thing. I'm not exactly sure what it is. It's an interesting detail because it has those three big nuts in there. Those will really look interesting on the normal map. So making sure to get some decent silhouette out of that piece. If you really want to cut polygons, you might make that piece completely square, but I'm at least using like a few extra tries to get it to look more interesting. So trying to line this up, making sure that the thickness is correct. And then adding some extra cuts in here. And as to not overcomplicate things when baking, I'm deciding to, for this piece, model a few things as a single object. They're not too complex in shape, and the work that it costs me to model these as a single piece will save me the extra effort that's required when baking them as separate pieces. Though I have to keep in mind the tricky thing about this part is also that it's reused over the rest of the suspension, but always in slightly different ways. Like there might be a slightly mirrored version or something, and there's actually a mirrored version, but this, I wouldn't know how to call this detail. Like this sort of cylindrical detail is actually not mirrored, while the rest of the part is mirrored. So that's why I have to keep it separate. If I model them as a single piece, I'm not going to be able to reuse the texture there. It's really important that I model this separately. This might be a little bit hard to imagine when I'm not showing you the unwrap yet, but it definitely pays off to keep your unwraps and your texturing in mind while you are modeling already. So trying to optimize this, I'm just going to drag it into a single point and weld this together. There we go. It might seem crude to weld them into a point, but then again, you really won't see this piece. Now this back area, I'm going to try and close that up a bit. moving this out. Using snapping to align this correctly. Again, using bridge. And then using create polygon to create these two tries here. Instead of using create polygon again, it's easier to fill those holes with cap, so that's what I just did. So next up are these small wheels. There really are a lot of these wheels. As you can see, there are, I think it's about 16 per side. We might not use all of these in the low poly even, but because there are so many of them, I'm not using too many sides on this wheel piece. I'm trying to keep it simple, so I've decided to only use about, it should be about 12 sides there. 12 or 10 sides, I could probably get away with a number like that. So here's another one of those interesting sort of bracket-like things for the wheels. I'm redoing this one because, well, it is slightly different from the other one, and I'm also going to be able to use the mirror tool here to create that second one. And I'm not using mirror in an obvious way here, but actually to create a duplicate, and then I'm able to bridge these two parts together there. Also for this part, I'm not going to go as far as to detail the ends that much. Just want to keep it simpler with a more boxish shape. So for these little wheels here, I decided, it's going to look better in silhouette. I mean, it might pay off to create an actual rounded front side for that, so that's what I just did here. So there we go. That's the main basic components. So now I'm going to reuse this a few times. See over here? Difficult thing is, it's mirrored, but not completely. Some parts are mirrored, some parts are not. So I'm actually going to adjust this a little bit like that. Then drag this one over here. And when unwrapping, I am going to come back and overlay some parts onto each other to save some UV space. Then copy this one. These two are identical. As you can see, four of them might look the same on first sight, but there's actually 3 different ones in there. Only 2 of them are equal. But there you go, that one. And then see this last one? This last one is mirrored for some reason, so that's why I kept this as a separate part. Otherwise, I would have had a lot more work to adjust all of that. So then we go back to this roller, and just for detail's sake, I'm adding a really simple sort of axle spindle type of thing in the middle there. All it serves is to make the wheels look like they're not floating, so I can just use 4 sides there. I could even use 3, but that's a little bit too much, I think, so just 4 sides. Okay, so we've done quite a lot already. So time for, once I've aligned these, it's going to be time for the next part of the suspension, which is the big main part there. So we're going to align this little piece here, which we duplicated from the other side. And once that's correct, I'm going to start creating the last major part of the suspension. For that, I'm creating these cylinders here. And I'm creating these cylinders first because they're pretty determining for the shape. There's a few cylinders that I need to model these as one piece, and it's going to require some effort to get some decent poly flow around those. So that's why I'm creating these cylinders first, to make sure that I will work around them correctly. Also, I'm trying to get the correct amount of segments on them to make sure that I don't use too many or don't use too little. Again, I'm going to repeat this. It's really important for the low poly that you keep the amount of segments in mind. So trying to get this one to line up correctly. All right, this one here looks about right as well. So I'm converting it into a polygon. And that should be okay. Now for the big part that I have to connect this cylinder to, it's also made up out of a cylinder, but it's half a cylinder. Like the top is curved. So what I do here is I create a cylinder to start working from. And I'm going to create the top as if it was a cylinder, then delete the bottom half and continue with that. So first off is creating the cylinder, getting the amount of segments right. Again, this is an important part. You're really going to see this pretty obviously in a screenshot, since it really sits at eye height for the player or for in real life. So creating the second part here, these little steps in there, they're just too big. not to do in a normal map. So I'm just modeling this, trying to get it to line up correctly. And as you can see with cylinders, I always try to get about half of the high poly is visible, and then half of the low poly is visible. That's pretty much the best case you can have when it's with a curved surface. Now, next up is trying to get these surfaces to, well, the little steps, they merge together, they disappear into a triangle. So I'm snapping them together and then welding these vertices. And then I'm going to be moving these edges so that they match up with the high poly again. So like that. And then obviously I want to use symmetry on this thing because the left and right sides, or the front and back, depends on how you look at it, they're the same. And you really won't see the back side all that much. So I'm just going to share textures there and simply delete that side and use symmetry on it. So next up, I'm adding these edges. And what these edges serve for, they're there to sort of bridge in and compass the area where I'm going to cut out that cylindrical intersection. Now, for this, I'm not going to use cut tool or anything. I think my best bet would be to use compound objects and then do a boolean. I very rarely do a boolean. If I do a boolean, I have to make sure that everything's set up correctly so that I will get a clean cut with minimal work to clean things up afterwards. So this has been an intersection, but it's done what I expected really. These are two separate parts, so I can get rid of that back part, and then this front part over here, I'm just going to temporarily hide that. I'm not deleting it, I'm hiding it, so that I can meanwhile clean up this area around here. So first up is getting rid of the n-gons, selecting all these vertices in pairs, and then just simply using the connect tool on them to connect these up and make sure that I have triangles instead of n-gons. Then I'm welding a few vertices together that sit really close together. I'm sort of breaking away from the perfect cylindrical shape there, but it doesn't matter so much because you won't really notice, and the normal map will make sure it looks nice and round anyway. So then I'm welding these into place. The corner points of the cylinder are really important. Like the big surface where it sits into is not that important. And then I'm gonna move this one in because this thing it's half extruded inwards, half extruded outwards, and at the point where it's extruded in and outwards, I need to make sure there's a vertex. So you can see I'm in luck. Well, no, actually, I tried to really take care of that and try to make sure that there was a vertex to work with. And once I've done that, I'm just going to simply extrude this part here to match the high poly closely. And then I'm going to use the connect tool to connect these things up, triangulate it. Well, not triangulate, but I'm just going to make sure that there's no n-gons here, because especially for the end of a cylinder, which sits on such a complex shape, it really is a good idea to make sure that you don't have any n-gons there. Now I'm retriangulating these other parts here, which is really quite important because I can save quite a few tries and simplify this thing quite a bit. Like if you don't watch out, this thing can get quite complex. So again, I'm welding these together, moving these in, and then I'm stretching those edges here, those tries, so just getting rid of them and retriangulating this in a method I think is better. It's best to have big and equal quads or just tries instead of these really long, thin, stretched ones. The long, thin, stretched ones are something you definitely want to avoid. They give weird shading. They're just not going to do what you want. So you can see we can really optimize this quite a bit. I'm going to weld that one in there. And as you can see, it creates a problem there. So I'm getting rid of that edge and then simply doing the same thing on the other side. Once I've done that, selecting these parts and just retriangulating that. There we go. I'm doing the same thing here. And that should be okay to work with. So now that I've done that, I'm going to try and align these things because I've messed up the curve a little bit. Like the edges are running a bit crooked. So what I'm trying to do is using the snap tool to get them to align correctly again. And that looks about right. So with that done, I can do some more target welding. Optimize this even further. I think that should be it for this part. So the next part is not very difficult. This is just a straight area, so I'm going to shift drag this down. And there are these slightly curved areas at the bottom here. I need to make sure that I have the geometry to actually create those. Adding an extra cut in here to make sure that I can match the silhouette closely. So then I'm going to continue and try and optimize this a bit. It might make more sense to weld those together. It's going to save me 2 tries, so let's do that. Then I'm going to merge these, get these two closer so we match the silhouette better. I'm trying to do the same thing here. I'm using chamfer to make sure that I have 2 vertices to work with, and I'm going to scale those outwards. It's a bit too much. This looks about right. And then shift move that down as well, and do the same thing. Clean up this side a bit, and get this one nicely into the center there, and I'm going to use snapping to align it perfectly to the center over there. So that looks about right. Grab these, and once I have them, I'm going to do a bridge and then cap that hole, and that should be the quickest way. I'm going to get rid of them and just retriangulate it in a way that I prefer seeing. Okay, so that's been done. Now I'm using another connect, and these need to be slightly rounder. If they were that straight, you would really notice. So I'm adding some more, actually a third one even in there to get them perfectly round on the underside. So we've still got some closing up to do here. So I'm selecting these parts here and shift moving them outwards. That should be about the correct distance. And there's really a lot of stuff in my way now, so it's a bit difficult to work. I might have to hide some stuff in a moment. But first I'm going to weld that one to avoid these floating vertices, and then get rid of that messy part at the back and model this part here. Before I'm going to work on the underside, let's just do the top side first, and then we'll hide and finish up the underside. So using the limited vertices I have, I'm going to try and match the silhouette, not using any extras. I can just use the existing ones and make do with those. And shift move that back, and this also needs to sit a little bit further back. There we go. Okay, so this is working, and right here add this extra one, and then instead of using create polygon, I just use target weld on a quad to turn it into a try. And cut another one in here because I'm actually going to need that. And it's going to start to become a little bit tricky here because I want to be able to connect things up with this cylinder here. And you could see me reduce the segments a bit there. Like I said, it's quite important, and there's no reason to have that many on there. Okay, so first I'm going to do this. It's the connector. The main suspension axle connects up and continues past the suspension to connect up with the main supports for the blade at the front. Okay, so with that basic shape done, I'm starting to connect these things up. So there's going to be a lot of cutting, target welding. Just match this area up down here. Right here, I'm thinking I'll probably bridge these and cap that hole, and then get rid of that one in the center, which is the quickest way to fill that up with polygons. Then target weld those, target weld that as well, and that looks about right. And bridge these, and again do a connect here. Really is best to tackle this triangulating as quick as possible. I'm thinking now, the thing I just did, it's probably better to go for a sort of radial shape here. So I'm just going to try and redo that and see if I can't create something better out of it. And when I do this, I can actually match up that tiny ridge there, which when you would try to save some polygons, you wouldn't really do that. You would leave it up to the normal map. But I'm trying to go slightly more detail here, so I'm actually going to model that out. So you can see most of it's the same. I just created an extra edge, an extra corner in there. Then using create polygon. That's a little bit too coarse, so I'm going to use cut again to cut an extra part in there. Move those down. Select those now, and shift move them like that, all the way to the center. And now all I have to do is close up this gap here. So again, you can see me use the trick of bridge first and then a cap afterwards quite a lot. And it's easy because you don't have to, you're not bothered by, you're not stopped by the open edges that you can't cap when you're working with symmetry. So with bridge, you can actually create an enclosed border and then use cap on that enclosed border. Right, so this back part here, which really is relatively simple, it's just a blocky shape. And that should match it nicely. Drag that one out there and back up there. And I'm going to try and snap this in there, so making sure that our snap works decently. And then once it's up there, I'm going to target weld those. There we go. That's connected. Now next up is bridging these parts and just slowly closing everything up. I think I'm just going to cap this here, just cap it completely, and then start to manually connect these things up. So it's giving me a hard time with capping, so let's just give it another try. Cap. There we go. Last time didn't work, so gotta make sure it actually worked decently. Then select these vertices, connect them. Now I'm trying to halve it first, and then go in after that and add the extra edges after that. So now I've hidden all the rest, just using hide selected or hide unselected. And once that's done, going in, I'm going to create the inside of this part here. And you can see I'm sort of stretching geometry a little bit, and things might look slightly sloppier, but it doesn't really matter because this is the underside that you will pretty much never see. So that's why I'm not spending too much time with it. So just connecting these things up to create a solid enclosed mesh. Then the back of these things, I'm going to cap those. And I can't cap yet because I need to cut in another extra edge there. So there we go. And connect. And I'm going to optimize the back of these little rounded shapes a bit because again, you will never see it. It doesn't matter if the silhouette there is not as good as the rest. And use another connect there. Okay, so the smoothing groups are slightly messed up here, so just a quick auto smooth. There we go, that should do it. That looks about right. So one final part, this thing here, again, since it's so visible, I've decided to actually model it in. Again, if you want to save some polygons, you could probably skip this thing, but I've decided that it's going to look better if I go and actually model it in. So I'm using the cut tool to cut the big shape in there. And first the big base shape. And once I have that big shape, just trying to make sure I'm not creating any n-gons here. Then I'm going to select these polygons and bevel them outwards. So taking care not to go too far. Something like that. I need to pull it outwards a little bit more. I'm trying to tweak this because it might be a little bit too small, but it should be okay. All right, then a final small detail here. I'm just going to use some box modeling with extrudes. I just extrude every piece and then select the vertices and try and align them nicely. And because this thing is quite visible, I'm spending enough polygons on it so that the silhouette looks nice. Okay, so it tends to curve a little bit more upward, so I'm using a few more polygons there. And aligning this, and obviously I'm only going to create one half of it, so I will be using symmetry on it. I have to delete. I'm going to use symmetry on it twice actually. First, well, for this piece, I've actually decided to not use the same symmetry as the bottom part of the mesh, because then I'll have an extra edge in the center and it'll increase the tricon a little bit. I don't think that's a good idea, so I'm just going to keep it as a separate part for now. So then in here we have this pneumatic piston, which forms the connection between these two parts. And all it really is a it's just a cylinder. And again, I want to share textures here, so I'm going to attach it to the blue part that I'm working on. But there we go. And with that done, I'm going to model this final part here. And trying to get the silhouette in there to sort of match up. It doesn't have to match too much, because this shape will be inside the actual supports for the blade, but there still has to be something there. So now we've created all the major parts for the suspension. So I'm going to unhide the rest and delete these parts here. Just want to instance everything at the same time. So select them, and that looks about correct. I don't have all the parts, but those will be mirrored later. And instance them, and that should be it for this part of the video.